Deep in the belly of the warship Dominion's Edge, Tom Bradley crawled through a maintenance tunnel that most people forgot existed. The tunnel was barely wide enough for a human, filled with pipes and cables that carried power to every corner of the massive ship. Tom moved through the cramped space like he belonged there, checking connections and testing systems that kept 30,000 people alive in the cold darkness of space. The ship was having problems, small problems that the fancy computer systems could not find or fix. The quantum engine made a tiny noise every 12 hours that told Tom something was wrong with the power flow. The life support systems worked fine, but Tom could smell the difference in the air that meant the filters needed cleaning. The artificial gravity felt just a little too heavy on Deck 7, which meant the gravity generators were working too hard. Tom saw these problems because he paid attention. He had been working on ships for 15 years, starting when he was just 16 years old on a cargo hauler that broke down more often than it worked. His father had been a mechanic too, and his grandfather before that. They were the kind of people who fixed things while other people talked about fixing things. Nobody else on the Dominion's Edge seemed to notice Tom. He wore the same gray uniform as hundreds of other maintenance workers. He ate in the same cafeteria, slept in the same shared quarters, and walked the same corridors. But while other workers fixed what they were told to fix, Tom fixed what needed fixing. 3 months ago, Tom had found a crack in one of the main power cables. The crack was so small that the ship's sensors could not detect it, but Tom could see it would grow bigger over time. If the cable failed completely, it would shut down power to half the ship. People would die. Tom had written a repair request and sent it to the engineering department. 2 weeks later, he got an answer that said the cable was fine and did not need repair. Tom had written another request, this time with detailed measurements and photos. That request was denied too. The third request was never answered at all. So, Tom fixed the cable himself. He worked during the night shift when fewer people were around. He carefully removed the damaged section and replaced it with a new piece of cable. But Tom did not just replace the broken part. He also improved the connections on both ends, added better insulation, and rerouted some of the power load to reduce stress on the system. When Tom was finished, the power flow to that section of the ship was smoother and more stable than it had ever been. The lights were brighter, the computers ran faster, and the environmental systems worked more efficiently. Nobody noticed the improvement because it happened gradually, but Tom knew the ship was better than before. Tom had made dozens of similar repairs over the past 3 months. Each time he made the ship a little bit better. The quantum engine ran smoother because Tom had adjusted the field harmonics. The navigation systems were more accurate because Tom had recalibrated the sensor arrays. The weapons charged faster because Tom had optimized the power distribution networks. The Dominion's Edge was becoming the most efficient ship in the Imperial fleet, and nobody knew why. High above Tom's maintenance tunnels, Emperor Draken Voss reviewed reports in his private study. The Emperor was a tall man with silver hair and cold blue eyes that had seen the conquest of 100 worlds. He dressed in black uniforms with gold trim that marked him as the ruler of half the galaxy. Everything about the Emperor spoke of power and control. The reports on the Emperor's desk showed that the Dominion's Edge was performing better than any other ship in the fleet. Fuel consumption was down by 12%. System failures had dropped to almost 0. Response times for all ship functions had improved by an average of 8%. The improvements had no explanation. Chief Engineer Norton had submitted 3 different reports trying to explain the ship's increased performance. The first report blamed better crew training. The second report credited improved maintenance, schedules. The third report simply admitted that Norton had no idea what was causing the improvements. The Emperor was not particularly interested in technical details. He cared about results, and the Dominion's Edge was delivering excellent results. If his engineers could not explain why the ship was working so well, that was their problem to solve. The Emperor had more important things to worry about: Rebel fleets were gathering in the outer systems, threatening Imperial shipping lanes and supply depots. Intelligence reports suggested a major attack was being planned, possibly against the Dominion's edge itself. The Emperor needed his flagship to be ready for battle. What the Emperor did not know was that Tom Bradley was already preparing for that battle. Tom had noticed subtle changes in the ship's operating patterns that suggested they would soon see combat. More weapons tests, increased security patrols, and changes in the daily routine that meant the officers were expecting trouble. Tom had spent the last 2 weeks checking every system on the ship that would be critical during a battle. He had tested backup power systems, verified that all emergency protocols would work correctly, and made small improvements to the ship's defensive systems that would give them an edge when the fighting started. Tom also did something else that no one expected. He had been quietly studying the technical specifications of rebel ships whenever the Dominion's edge scanned them during patrols. Tom learned how those ships were built, what their weaknesses were, and how their systems worked. He stored this information in his head, waiting for the day when it might be useful. That day was coming sooner than anyone expected. In 2 weeks, the rebel fleet would attack, and the Dominion's edge would face its greatest test. The ship would survive that battle because of work that Tom was doing right now, crawling through maintenance tunnels and fixing problems that nobody else could see. But the victory would create a mystery that would consume the Emperor's attention and change the course of the war. The rebels would be defeated so completely and so mysteriously that the Emperor would become convinced that someone with incredible abilities was working for the Imperial cause. The Emperor would spend months and millions of credits trying to find this mysterious person. He would never think to look in the maintenance tunnels where Tom Bradley continued his quiet work, keeping the ship running and protecting the people who called it home. The rebel attack came during the night shift, when most of the crew was sleeping and the ship was running on minimum power. Tom Bradley was awake, as he often was during the quiet hours, working on a problem with the air recycling system on deck 12. He felt the ship's engines change their vibration pattern before any alarm sounded, and he knew that trouble was coming. Tom dropped his tools and ran through the maintenance corridors toward the main engineering section. He had prepared for this moment for weeks, and now his work would be put to the test. The ship would need every advantage he could give it. The first rebel ships appeared on the long-range sensors at 0347 hours ship time. 18 vessels, including 3 heavy cruisers, and a battleship that outgunned the Dominion's edge 2-1. The rebel fleet had positioned itself between the Imperial flagship and the nearest reinforcements, forcing the Dominion's edge to fight alone. Emperor Voss reached the bridge within minutes of the first alarm. He moved with the calm confidence of a man who had won 100 battles, but Tom could feel the tension in the ship's systems as the crew prepared for combat. Power flows changed as weapons came online, artificial gravity fluctuated as the inertial compensators adjusted for combat maneuvers, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with nervous energy. The rebels transmitted a surrender demand that the Emperor ignored. They wanted to capture the Dominion's edge intact, along with its valuable prisoner. The Emperor had no intention of surrendering his flagship to pirates and terrorists. The battle should have been hopeless. The rebel fleet had superior numbers, better positioning, and newer ships with advanced weapons systems. Military analysts would later study the engagement and conclude that the Dominion's edge should have been destroyed within the first 10 minutes of fighting. Instead, something impossible happened. Tom Bradley sat in front of a maintenance terminal deep in the ship's engineering section, his fingers flying over controls that were never meant to be used during combat. For the past month, he had been preparing for this moment, writing code and installing hardware that would turn the Dominion's edge into something more than just another warship. The first phase of Tom's plan activated when the rebel ships moved into attack formation. He had studied their ship designs for months, learning about their power systems, weapons configurations, and defensive measures. Tom knew that all rebel ships used the same basic computer operating system, with small modifications for different ship classes. Tom had found weaknesses in that operating system, tiny flaws in the programming that could be exploited if you knew exactly what to look for. The rebels had protected their ships against conventional computer attacks, but they had never considered what might happen if someone rewrote the laws of physics. Through the Dominion's Edge sensor array, Tom transmitted what appeared to be routine scanning data toward the rebel fleet. The transmissions looked harmless, just normal sensor sweeps that every warship performed during combat. But hidden inside the scanner data were instructions written in a language that the rebel computers would understand and obey. The first rebel ship to receive Tom's signal was a heavy cruiser named the Freedom's Call. The ship's computers accepted the scanning data as normal sensor input, but the hidden instructions began to propagate through the ship's networks like a virus. Within 30 seconds, the instructions reached the ship's power distribution system and began to make small changes. The changes were tiny at first, a slight adjustment to the power flow in the weapons systems, a minor modification to the engine, control parameters, small alterations to the artificial gravity generators. Each change was well within normal operating limits, but together they began to create a resonance pattern that the ship's designers had never anticipated. The Freedom's Call shuddered as its own systems began to fight against each other. Weapons that tried to charge found their power supply fluctuating wildly. Engines that attempted to maneuver discovered that their control signals were being interpreted differently by different components. The artificial gravity began to pulse in waves that made the crew sick and disoriented. Within 5 minutes, the Freedom's Call was dead in space, its systems locked in conflict with themselves. The ship was intact and the crew was alive, but the vessel was completely unable to function. Tom's signal spread through the rebel fleet like wildfire. Each ship that scanned the Dominion's Edge received the hidden instructions and began to experience the same system conflicts. The rebel commanders watched in horror as their fleet gradually lost power and maneuverability. But Tom was not finished. The second phase of his plan involved the Dominion's Edge itself, and it was even more remarkable than the first. For 3 months, Tom had been making small improvements to every system on the Imperial flagship. He had optimized power flows, improved system response times, and eliminated inefficiencies that the original designers had never noticed. The cumulative effect of these changes was that the Dominion's Edge could now operate far beyond its original specifications. As the rebel fleet struggled with system failures, the Dominion's Edge began to demonstrate capabilities that astonished its own crew. The ship's weapons fired faster and hit harder than they ever had before. The engines provided more power and better maneuverability than the specifications said was possible. The defensive shields absorbed enemy fire that should have penetrated to the hull. Emperor Voss stood on the bridge and watched his flagship perform miracles. The ship was fighting as if it had been blessed by the gods of war themselves. Every system worked perfectly, every weapon fired with deadly accuracy, and every defensive measure succeeded beyond all expectations. The battle lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. When it was over, the entire rebel fleet was floating helplessly in space, their ships intact but completely disabled. Not a single rebel had died, but their capacity to make war had been eliminated in a way that no one could explain. The crew of the Dominion's Edge celebrated their impossible victory, but Emperor Voss was not celebrating. He stared at the tactical display showing 18 disabled enemy ships and began to realize that something extraordinary had happened. This had not been a normal battle won through superior skill or luck. This had been a demonstration of power beyond anything he had ever seen. Someone aboard his ship possessed abilities that could change the course of the war. Someone had reached out across space and crushed an enemy fleet without firing a shot. Someone had turned the Dominion's Edge into a weapon more powerful than any battleship ever built. The Emperor needed to find this person. He needed to understand what had happened and how it could be used to secure his empire. He began to plan, an investigation that would turn his fleet upside down in search of answers. Deep in the engineering section, Tom Bradley finished shutting down his systems and began to clean up his tools. The ship was safe, the crew was alive, and the immediate threat was over. Tomorrow there would be other problems to solve and other repairs to make. Tom did not know that his actions had created a mystery that would obsess the Emperor for months to come. He had simply done his job, protecting the ship and the people who lived aboard it. The fact that his work had effects beyond the ship itself was just a side benefit of doing the job properly. 6 months after the impossible battle with the rebel fleet, strange reports began reaching Emperor Voss from across the galaxy. Ships were disappearing without a trace, only to be found days later in perfect condition, but completely empty. Entire. Space stations would suddenly lose all power for exactly 1 hour before their systems mysteriously restored themselves. Pirate fleets that had terrorized shipping lanes for years simply vanished, their ships found drifting in space with crews that remembered nothing of the previous week. The Emperor sat in his private study, reading the latest intelligence reports with growing fascination. Each incident was different, but they all shared certain characteristics. The technology involved was far beyond anything the Empire possessed. The timing was perfect, as if the mysterious operator knew exactly when and where to strike. Most importantly, every incident ultimately benefited Imperial interests. Director Kane of Imperial Intelligence stood at attention beside the Emperor's desk, holding a thick folder of investigation results. Kane was a thin man with sharp features and eyes that missed nothing. He had built his career on finding secrets that other people wanted to keep hidden, but this case was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The Emperor looked up from the reports with cold blue eyes that reflected decades of absolute power. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had never been disobeyed. Kane had served the Emperor for 20 years, but he still felt a chill when that voice was directed at him. "Tell me what you have learned," the Emperor commanded. Kane opened his folder and consulted notes that represented months of intensive investigation. His best agents had worked around the clock, following leads across 100 worlds and interviewing thousands of suspects. The results were both impressive and completely useless. "We have confirmed 37 separate incidents that match the pattern," Kane reported. "Each one demonstrates technological capabilities that exceed our current understanding by several decades. The operator has access to Imperial communication networks, detailed knowledge of enemy ship designs, and the ability to modify complex systems remotely." The Emperor gestured impatiently for Kane to continue. He had read all of this in the preliminary reports, and he wanted answers, not summaries. "We have investigated over 15,000 potential suspects," Kane continued. "Every engineer with advanced degrees, every physicist working on classified projects, every computer specialist with access to Imperial networks. We have monitored their communications, tracked their movements, and analyzed their psychological profiles." And Kane's expression revealed the frustration that had been building for months. "His investigation was the largest and most expensive in the history of Imperial intelligence. But it had produced nothing useful." "Nothing, sir. Whoever is responsible for these incidents has left no trace in our records. They have published no research, filed no patents, and attended no universities that we can identify. They appear to have no official existence within the Empire." The Emperor stood and walked to the large window that looked out over the capital city. Millions of people lived and worked in the sprawling metropolis below, any one of whom might be the genius he sought. The thought was both exciting and deeply frustrating. Increase the reward to 200 million credits, the Emperor decided. Expand the investigation to include every person with technical training, regardless of their current position. I want clerks and technicians interviewed, mechanics and maintenance workers questioned. Leave no stone unturned. 20 levels below the Imperial Palace, Tom Bradley was having lunch in the ship's cafeteria. He sat at a corner table with 3 other maintenance workers eating synthesized food that tasted better than it had any right to. Tom had spent the morning improving the food processing systems, adjusting molecular patterns and optimizing flavor combinations in ways that the original designers had never considered. Tom listened with quiet amusement as his co-workers discussed the rumors that were spreading through the ship. Everyone knew that the Emperor was searching for someone with incredible technical abilities. The reward money was more than most people would earn in several lifetimes, and speculation about the mysterious person's identity was the favorite topic of conversation among the crew. "I heard it might be someone in the engineering department," said Phillips, a young technician who specialized in environmental systems. "Maybe one of the senior officers has been working on secret projects." "Could be anyone," replied Martinez, an older worker who had been maintaining ships for 30 years. "Whoever it is, they know more about technology than all of our engineers combined. The things they've done are impossible according to everything I learned in technical school." Tom smiled and continued eating his lunch. If his co-workers knew that the person they were speculating about was sitting right next to them, they would probably think it was a joke. Tom looked like exactly what he was, a maintenance worker with grease under his fingernails and patches on his uniform. He was not the kind of person that emperors searched for or that intelligence agencies investigated. The truth was that Tom had never attended university or worked on classified projects. His knowledge came from years of hands-on experience with systems that broke down regularly and had to be fixed with whatever parts were available. He had learned to see connections between different technologies because he had to make those connections work in the real world. While Imperial engineers studied theoretical principles in comfortable laboratories, Tom had learned by crawling through broken machinery in the middle of deep space. While scientists published papers about what might be possible, Tom had figured out what actually worked by trying thousands of different approaches until he found ones that succeeded. The latest incident that had the intelligence services puzzled was typical of Tom's approach to problem solving. A pirate fleet had been terrorizing merchant ships in the Outer Rim, and the Imperial Navy was too far away to respond quickly. Tom had used the Dominion's Edge communication array to access the pirates' ship systems and make a few small adjustments. The adjustments were so minor that they would not be detected by normal diagnostic systems. A slight change in the timing of the navigation computers. A small modification to the life support controls. A tiny alteration in the artificial gravity generators. Each change by itself was harmless and well within normal operating parameters. But when all the changes worked together, they created a pattern that made the pirate crews increasingly uncomfortable and disoriented. After a week of feeling seasick and dizzy, the pirates abandoned their ships and sought medical attention at the nearest space station. They told doctors that their ships had become haunted and were making them sick. Imperial forces found the abandoned pirate vessels a few days later and returned them to their home port after removing all the weapons and navigation equipment. The former pirates were so grateful to be on solid ground that they happily accepted jobs as dock workers and cargo handlers. Tom finished his lunch and returned to work, leaving his co-workers to continue their speculation about the Empire's mysterious benefactor. He had systems to maintain and problems to solve, and the afternoon shift would bring new challenges that required his attention. The irony was not lost on Tom that the Emperor's investigation was making his job more difficult. Increased security measures meant that Tom had to be more careful about when and how he accessed sensitive systems. Additional surveillance made it harder to work on projects that were not part of his official duties. The paranoia that was spreading through the ship created new problems that required Tom's attention to solve. But Tom was patient and adaptable. He had been working around bureaucratic obstacles his entire career, and he knew how to accomplish his goals without attracting unwanted attention. The Emperor could spend all the money he wanted searching for someone who did not exist in his databases. Meanwhile, Tom would continue doing his job, keeping the ship running smoothly and protecting the people who depended on him. If his work occasionally helped the Empire in ways that the Emperor appreciated, that was simply a side effect of doing good work. The hunt would continue for months, growing more desperate and more expensive with each failure. But the answer the Emperor sought would remain hidden in plain sight, wearing a maintenance uniform and carrying a toolbox filled with solutions to problems that nobody else could solve. Lieutenant Maria Rodriguez had been conducting security interviews for 3 months, and she was tired of asking the same questions and getting the same answers. Every conversation followed the same pattern. The subject would nervously deny any knowledge of advanced technology or mysterious abilities, provide an alibi for their whereabouts during recent incidents, and express hope that the Emperor would find whoever he was looking for. Rodriguez was a thorough investigator who had built her reputation on noticing details that other people missed. She was also getting frustrated with an investigation that seemed to lead nowhere despite consuming enormous amounts of time and resources. The mysterious person the Emperor sought remained as elusive as smoke, leaving no traces that the finest minds in Imperial intelligence could follow. The breakthrough came during a routine interview with Chief Petty Officer Williams from the ship's food service department. Williams was a cheerful man who had worked in the galley for 8 years without attracting any attention from security. He answered Rodriguez's questions with the same polite confusion that she had heard from hundreds of other crew members. Halfway through the interview, Rodriguez's datapad began displaying random error messages before the screen went completely black. She sighed and apologized to Williams, explaining that technical problems had been plaguing the investigation teams for weeks. "No worries at all," Williams replied with a smile. "These things happen. Just take it down to maintenance and ask for Tom Bradley. That man can fix anything, and I mean anything. Last week, my coffee machine was making this awful grinding noise, and I thought it was ready for the scrap heap. Tom had it working better than new in about 10 minutes. Rodriguez made a note to have her datapad repaired, but something about Williams's casual comment stuck in her mind. She had heard similar stories from other crew members during her interviews. Equipment that worked better after maintenance visits. Systems that performed beyond their original specifications after. Routine repairs, always the same name mentioned with quiet respect and gratitude. That evening, Rodriguez began a different kind of investigation. Instead of looking for someone with advanced degrees and classified clearances, she started researching Tom Bradley, maintenance technician 3rd class. Tom's personnel file was remarkably ordinary. Born on Haven's Rest, a frontier colony known for frequent equipment failures and long delays in receiving replacement parts. Basic technical education from a community college that specialized in practical engineering rather than theoretical. Research. 15 years of experience maintaining civilian ships before joining the Imperial Navy 9 months ago. Nothing in the file suggested that Tom possessed unusual abilities or advanced knowledge. His test scores were good, but not exceptional. His work evaluations were consistently positive, but contained no mention of remarkable achievements. He was exactly what he appeared to be, a competent maintenance worker with solid experience and a good work ethic. But Rodriguez was trained to look beyond the obvious. She began cross-referencing maintenance records with system performance data, tracking patterns that might reveal something more significant than routine repairs. What she found made her hands shake as she reviewed the data. Every system that Tom Bradley had touched in the past 9 months showed dramatic improvements in performance and reliability. The patterns were so consistent and so remarkable that they could not possibly be coincidental. Equipment that should have failed months ago was running perfectly. Systems that typically required constant attention were operating without any problems at all. The quantum engine modifications that had allowed the Dominion's Edge to outperform an entire rebel fleet? Tom had been working in the engine room during the week before that battle. The communication array improvements that provided clearer signals across impossible distances. Tom had performed what was logged as routine maintenance on those systems. Rodriguez spent the entire night analyzing data and cross-referencing records. By dawn, she had documented dozens of incidents where Tom's work had produced results that defied explanation according to conventional engineering principles. The man was either incredibly lucky or incredibly skilled, and Rodriguez did not believe in that much luck. She faced a decision that could define the rest of her career. She could report her findings through official channels, triggering a massive investigation that would certainly identify Tom as the Emperor's mysterious benefactor. The reward money would make her rich beyond her wildest dreams, and her reputation would be secured forever, or she could approach Tom directly and try to understand what was really happening before involving the Emperor and his intelligence apparatus. Rodriguez chose the direct approach. She found Tom in Engineering Section 7, working on what appeared to be a routine calibration of the ship's inertial compensators. He was alone, as he usually was, methodically testing systems and making adjustments with the quiet efficiency that characterized all of his work. Tom looked up when Rodriguez entered the section, showing no surprise at her appearance. His expression was calm and alert, the look of someone who was always aware of his surroundings but never worried about what he might find. "Lieutenant Rodriguez," Tom said, setting down his tools and giving her his full attention. "I assume this is not a social visit. I need to ask you some questions about your work," Rodriguez replied, studying Tom's face for any sign of deception or alarm. "What would you like to know?" Rodriguez had prepared for this conversation, but she found herself uncertain how to begin. "How did you ask someone if they were secretly a genius who could perform technological miracles?" "The inertial compensators," she said finally. "What exactly are you doing to them?" Tom gestured at the complex machinery that surrounded them. "The compensators were running about 15% below optimal efficiency. I'm adjusting the field harmonics and recalibrating the quantum resonance chambers to bring them back up to proper levels." "Proper levels according to what standard?" Tom's expression showed mild confusion at the question. "According to what they're actually capable of producing. The original specifications were written by engineers who never had to live with the systems they designed. They built in safety margins that are much larger than necessary, which means the equipment runs far below its real potential. And you know what that real potential is? I can see it when I test the systems. Most people read the numbers that the computers display and assume those numbers represent the truth. I test the actual performance and compare it to what the computers think is happening. Usually there's a significant difference." Rodriguez felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, about to discover something that would change everything she thought she knew about technology and the people who worked with it. "Tom," she said carefully, "do you have any idea what the Emperor has been looking for?" Tom was quiet for a long moment, studying Rodriguez with eyes that seemed older than his age suggested. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that had not been there before. "I know that things work better after I fix them," he said. "I know that problems have solutions if you're willing to look for them. And I know that the ship and everyone on it are safer because of the work I do. The rebel fleet that we defeated 6 months ago, the pirate ships that have been disappearing throughout the Empire, the mysterious incidents that have been helping Imperial forces across the galaxy." Tom nodded slowly. "I protect what's mine, Lieutenant. The Dominion's Edge is my ship. The people aboard her are my responsibility. Sometimes protecting them means reaching beyond the ship itself." Rodriguez realized that she was looking at the answer to a mystery that had consumed the Empire's attention for months. The person the Emperor sought was standing in front of her, wearing a maintenance uniform and holding a wrench like it was the most natural thing in the world. "What do you want me to do with this information?" she asked. Tom considered the question seriously before answering. "That depends on what you think is best for the ship and the people who live here. I'll keep doing my job regardless of what happens, but I'd prefer to do it without having to deal with crowds of investigators and scientists who want to study me like a laboratory specimen." Rodriguez looked around the engineering section, where Tom had quietly performed miracles for 9 months without anyone noticing. She thought about the Emperor's desperate search and the 200 million credit reward that could change her life forever. Then she thought about what would happen if Tom were taken away from the ship and turned into a weapon or a test subject for Imperial scientists. "I need some time to think about this," she said. Tom nodded and returned to his work on the inertial compensators. "Take all the time you need, Lieutenant. I'm not going anywhere." Rodriguez left the engineering section with her mind spinning. She held the answer that the Emperor had been seeking, but she was no longer certain that giving him that answer was the right thing to do. Lieutenant Rodriguez spent 3 sleepless nights wrestling with her conscience before making the decision that would change the course of the Empire. She could have reported Tom directly to Imperial intelligence and claimed the enormous reward that waited for whoever solved the Emperor's mystery. Instead, she chose a different path that she hoped would protect both Tom and the ship that had become his home. Rodriguez requested a private audience with Emperor Voss, claiming to have critical information about the investigation. The request was granted immediately, as the Emperor had grown increasingly impatient with the lack of progress from his intelligence services. He met with Rodriguez in his private study, a room lined with star charts and tactical displays that showed the vast scope of his dominion. The Emperor listened in complete silence as Rodriguez explained what she had discovered about Tom Bradley. She described the maintenance worker's impossible abilities, documented the improvements he had made to the ship's systems, and provided evidence linking him to the mysterious incidents that had been helping Imperial forces across the galaxy. When Rodriguez finished her report, the Emperor sat quietly for several minutes, processing information that challenged everything he thought he knew about technology and the people who worked with it. Finally, he spoke in the cold, measured tones that had intimidated senators and generals for decades. "You are telling me that a maintenance worker has been performing miracles under our noses for 9 months and no one noticed?" "Everyone noticed, sir," Rodriguez replied carefully. "They just did not understand what they were seeing. Equipment worked better, systems lasted longer, problems solved themselves. People assumed it was normal because the improvements happened gradually." The Emperor stood and walked to his window, looking out over the city that served as the heart of his empire. Somewhere in that vast metropolis were universities and research institutions where the brightest minds in the galaxy studied theoretical physics and advanced engineering. Yet none of them possessed abilities that could match what a simple maintenance worker accomplished with basic tools and practical knowledge. "Bring him to me," the Emperor commanded. An hour later, Tom Bradley stood in the Emperor's private study, still wearing his maintenance uniform and carrying the toolkit that went with him everywhere. He showed no sign of nervousness or fear, despite being in the presence of the most powerful man in the galaxy. Tom looked around the study with the same calm attention he brought to examining a malfunctioning machine, noting details and making mental assessments. Emperor Voss studied Tom with the intensity he usually reserved for enemy commanders and political rivals. The man before him was utterly ordinary in appearance, the kind of person who blended into crowds and worked in background positions without attracting attention. Yet this unremarkable individual possessed capabilities that could reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. "So you are my ghost," the Emperor said finally. "I am a maintenance technician, Your Majesty," Tom replied in a steady voice that showed neither defiance nor submission. "I keep things working properly. You destroyed enemy fleets without firing a shot. You turned my flagship into the most efficient vessel in the Imperial Navy. You have demonstrated abilities that our best scientists consider impossible." Tom shrugged slightly, a gesture that somehow managed to be respectful, while also indicating that he did not consider his work particularly remarkable. "I solve problems, sir. Sometimes the problems involve enemy ships that threaten this vessel. Sometimes they involve our own systems that are not performing as well as they could." The Emperor began to pace around Tom, studying him from different angles as if trying to discover hidden secrets. Do you understand what you have accomplished? The strategic implications of your abilities? I understand that the ship runs better and the crew is safer because of the work I do, Tom answered. The strategic implications are not my area of responsibility. What do you want? The Emperor asked abruptly. Name your price. A fleet command, a research position, wealth beyond imagining, a world of your own to rule. Tom looked genuinely puzzled by the offer. I have what I want, Your Majesty. A ship to maintain, problems to solve, work that makes a difference. You could have power beyond anything you have ever imagined. Power over what, sir? I already have the ability to keep the ship running and protect the people who live here. What other power would I need? The Emperor stopped pacing and stared at Tom with an expression that mixed frustration with something that might have been respect. In his decades of rule, he had dealt with ambitious generals who wanted larger armies, corrupt governors who demanded more territory, and scheming nobles who sought greater influence. But he had never encountered someone who possessed ultimate power and was satisfied with using it to fix machinery and protect his co-workers. Very well, the Emperor said finally. You will continue your current duties aboard the Dominion's Edge, but I am assigning you additional resources. A full engineering team, unlimited budget for equipment and materials, whatever you need to expand your work. Tom looked uncomfortable with the offer. I do not need additional people, Your Majesty. Extra workers would interfere with my ability to do the job properly. The unlimited budget, then. The ship already provides everything I need to do my work effectively, sir. The Emperor felt a rare moment of complete bewilderment. He had ruled half the galaxy by understanding what people wanted and either giving it to them or denying it, to them as circumstances required. But Tom Bradley seemed to want nothing beyond the right to continue doing a job that nobody else valued or even understood. There must be something I can offer you, the Emperor insisted. Some way to improve your working conditions or expand your capabilities. Tom considered the question seriously as he approached all problems that required careful thought. After a long pause, he offered a suggestion that would have been laughable coming from anyone else. The coffee in the maintenance break room is not very good, Your Majesty. An upgrade to the food synthesizers would be appreciated by the entire maintenance staff. Lieutenant Rodriguez, who had been standing quietly in the corner of the room, struggled to suppress a laugh. Emperor Voss, absolute ruler of thousands of worlds and commander of fleets that could destroy entire star systems, stared at the man who wanted better coffee as payment for services that had changed the course of galactic history. Done, the Emperor said, his voice carrying a tone that suggested he was not entirely certain this conversation was really happening. Over the following months, the Dominion's Edge became the flagship of a fleet that rebels and pirates learned to fear above all others. Ships that sailed with the Imperial flagship never suffered mechanical failures, never lost battles due to equipment malfunctions, and never fell victim to the technological warfare that had become common throughout the galaxy. Enemy commanders began to speak in whispers about Imperial vessels that seemed to repair themselves during combat, that grew stronger as battles progressed, and that could reach across space to disable hostile fleets without firing a shot. The technological superiority that the Empire displayed became so overwhelming that many rebel groups simply surrendered rather than face the mysterious capabilities that Imperial forces had somehow acquired. The Emperor's investigation was quietly closed, and the reward money was returned to the Treasury. Official reports stated that the mysterious incidents had been the result of improved maintenance procedures and better crew training. No mention was made of Tom Bradley or his extraordinary abilities. Tom continued his work in the maintenance sections of the Dominion's Edge, solving problems and improving systems with the same quiet dedication he had always shown. The ship ran better than it ever had before, and the crew lived and worked in an environment where mechanical failures were rare and equipment performed beyond its design specifications. The coffee in the maintenance break room was indeed much better, a fact that pleased Tom more than any amount of money or recognition could have. He had everything he needed to do his job well, and his job was to keep the ship and its people safe. The Emperor had spent 200 million credits and turned his empire upside down searching for a ghost, only to discover that the ghost had been taking care of him all along. The most powerful man in the galaxy had been protected and served by someone who asked for nothing in return except the right to continue working. Some mysteries, Tom reflected as he installed another improved component in the ship's systems, solved themselves if you simply did your job well enough. The galaxy was full of complex problems that required simple solutions, and Tom had built his life around finding those solutions and implementing them quietly and efficiently. Years later, when historians wrote about the period that marked the Empire's technological supremacy over its enemies, they would struggle to explain how Imperial forces had suddenly acquired capabilities that seemed almost magical. The truth was simpler than they imagined, but it was also more remarkable. Sometimes the most extraordinary people were hiding in the most ordinary places, doing work that nobody else wanted to do and solving problems that nobody else even recognized. Tom Bradley had never sought recognition or reward for his abilities. He had simply found a ship that needed him and dedicated himself to keeping it running properly. The Empire had gained a technological advantage that would last for generations, and all it had cost was better coffee in a maintenance break room that most people never visited. Tom considered it a fair trade, and he was the only person whose opinion really mattered. The ghost that the Emperor had searched for so desperately had never really been a ghost at all. He had been exactly what he appeared to be, a maintenance worker who took pride in doing his job well and protecting the people who depended on him. In the end, that simple dedication had proven more powerful than all the wealth and authority that the Empire could command.